That's some pretty crazy weather out there. Hurricanes destroying people's homes, farm animals miscarrying. I think I even saw a witch living in her car, casting spells that sounded like reggae music. Maybe I'm getting today's books mixed up. The Booker Prize, the Oscars for novels in the English-speaking world. Since 1969, book nerds have waited for autumn with breaths held to find out which novel is the very best, as decided by 5 mega book nerds. It's had its fair share of controversy over the years. Like that time one of the judges said the winner was determined by, quote, who knows who's sleeping with who's selling drugs to who's married to who, and whose turn it is. Or back in 2000, when supermarket chain Iceland bought the prize's then parent company, and there were mutterings about renaming it to the Iceland Prize, which would have been hilarious. But that's all in the past. Today, the prize stands proud, an arbiter of taste in the literary world. Which of the 100 or so novels these 5 people got round to reading will be crowned the very best before being forgotten about forever? And who are the mega book nerds this year? Well, the chair is S.E. Dugin, who was shortlisted twice back in 2018 and 2011. Then there's a poet, a director, a professor in Shakespeare, and then there's Robert Webb of all people, he of the Mitchell and Webb look. All they need now is to get David Mitchell to judge, and the peep show takeover of the Booker will be complete. But I digress. Let's get on with this year's shortlist. For no particular reason, we're starting with If I Survive You by Jonathan Escoffery, a semi-autobiographical romp around Miami and Jamaica in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis and just a ton of hurricanes. The majority of the book follows Trelawney, a boy born in America to Jamaican parents who struggles with his identity, poverty, familial conflict and racism. You'll note I didn't call Trelawney our protagonist. We do follow Trelawney from birth into his 30s, but we also follow his brother, his father, and his cousin, and each of these threads seem to be given equal billing. It's first and foremost a book about fathers. From Trelawney's father, we get a beautifully written chapter in the second person about his motivations for moving away from Jamaica, how his marriage came to be, and how it came to fall apart. And the same familial conflict, but from his point of view. From his brother, we get a similar rundown of how his marriage fell apart, the hopes he had for the future, how he plans to win back his children, and do right by his own father. And from the cousin, we get a chapter about a long-lost father operating a drug smuggling ring, letting his friend get murdered by the cartel, and leaving his own son for dead? Wait, what? That came out of nowhere. Does it at least tie into the main story about Trelawney's family issues? No? Oh, okay then. I'm not complaining, it was an interesting chapter, but it felt like a short story from a different book. Then again, the whole book felt like a collection of short stories more than a cohesive novel. The point of view starts out in the second person. You feel this, you don't understand that, which usually I find jarring, but it works here. Probably because the early chapters are more focused on each character's internal world rather than anything they actually do. There's none of that, you open the door, you run down the hallway. It always seems so weird in other second person stories. But then, partway in, we jump to first person, then third. Some may call this ingenious, as indeed the New Yorker did, but for me it felt disjointed. This is the author's debut novel, and so he's likely to feel more comfortable writing shorter pieces. In an interview, he said it was a novel he was working on for 10 years, long enough to get bored and want to switch up the style and the point of view. Out of the 2 books on today's agenda, I'll give the recommendation prize to If I Survive You. For all my whining, it's a fantastically written collection of stories, clear and funny and moving, and it's most definitely worth your time. Perhaps it sets up more bowling pins than it knocks down. Perhaps it left me dangling over a few cliffhangers with no resolution. But frustrated is not bored, and you can't call If I Survive You boring. Strong characters and thought-provoking vignettes kept me engaged, which is more than can be said about our next book. Study for Obedience, then. This really is a book that illustrates how a concept that's interesting on paper can turn out like the paint drying festival when realised. I was excited when I read the blurb. A woman moves in with her brother in a remote northern country by an isolated village, but soon after she arrives, spooky things start to happen. An outbreak of bovine hysteria, multiple animal stillbirths, a potato blight. You had me at isolated village, Study for Obedience. So what's on the cards? A spooky curse? A town full of body snatchers or cultists? A haunting of Hill House-style descent into madness? Ooh, maybe the whole thing is an allegory for abuse or trauma or colonialism. Then I opened the book, and Study for Obedience proceeded to wave its Masters of the English Literature at me for 126 pages. It was boring, it was confusing, it was pointless. Maybe I'm just not smart enough to understand the complex nuances that make this book a moving glimpse into the nature of the soul, but for me this book was 100 pages too long. I've never gotten along with Granta publications. They've always left me cold, and I think Study for Obedience finally made me understand why. To a piece, they are blindingly pretentious. I know the Booker Prize likes to position itself as perpetually more intellectual than thou, and that's fine, there's a place for that, but I refuse to believe there is any human alive who benefited even a little from Study for Obedience's references page. Obscure essays, lectures, Virginia Woolf, Samuel Beckett, Montaigne, not a specific line from Montaigne, mind, not even a specific essay, just the whole of Montaigne's collected works, everything from Of Cato the Younger to Of Thumbs. Then the chapter headings have the gall to style themselves after Montaigne, Of Community Farming and A Meditation on Silence. Then, in the line-by-line reading, Study for Obediences can never simply say the smell of, it's always the aroma of. It's never my walks, it's my perambulations. Not from where, but whence. Yes, Study for Obedience, we're all very proud of your degree. Now what have you got in the way of atmosphere, character growth, message, meaning? In short, why am I reading this? To which Study for Obedience tossed some scraps at my feet before rolling over and going to sleep. Hey, perhaps it's a message about the historic mistreatment of the Jewish people. Perhaps it's an origin story for a village witch. Or I don't know, maybe she's making it all up and she's crazy, who knows? I'd have said it was satire of a classic Booker Prize book if there was an ounce of levity anywhere else in the text. No, not every book has to follow the same rigid structure. Not every book has to present a clean and obvious message. Not every book has to have characters in the usual sense. But what does Study for Obedience present in lieu of any of these? I've seen other reviews point to the atmosphere, the lonely town and the excluded woman on the outskirts, and it was certainly engaging. All 3 pages of it between the stream of rhetorical questions, SAT words, and ramblings about nothing that went nowhere. So congratulations, Study for Obedience. You automatically take last place in the Booker Shortlist 2023. And if any of the other 4 manage to bump you up to 5th place, then it'll be a truly dismal year for readers indeed.